Yo, what's happening, everyone? So I need to tell you about what went down on First Take this morning, because honestly, I was completely shocked by where this conversation went, and I'm still processing everything that was discussed. I had just finished reading ESPN's way too early power rankings, where they ranked the Los Angeles Rams third behind the Seahawks and Patriots, and gave them the offseason message to fix special teams. Made myself some coffee to think about all the moves the Rams need to make. Turned on ESPN to catch First Take, and there were Stephen A. Smith, Shannon Sharpe, and Mad Dog Russo getting ready to discuss the Rams and what they need to do to get back to the Super Bowl after coming so close. But instead of just breaking down the special teams issues or talking about which punters and kickers they should target, they pivoted into this absolutely wild discussion about whether the Rams should be pursuing Kenneth Walker III, who just won Super Bowl MVP, to completely transform their backfield and give them the dominant running game they need to finally get over the hump. And man, the way this entire segment unfolded had me sitting there completely captivated, because they were covering everything from the Rams' heartbreaking loss to Seattle to their need for a bell cow running back to whether trading significant assets for a Super Bowl MVP makes sense when you just came within 4 points of making the Super Bowl. Hey, what's up everyone? Before we dive into everything I have for you today, I need to share something real with you that would mean the absolute world to me. That subscribe button right there. Hitting it right now would bring me one step closer to my dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers. I know you're eager to get into all this content, but real quick, just smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It's such a simple thing. It takes literally 1 second, but it's honestly the biggest way you can support this journey and help me reach that milestone. Trust me, every single subscription gets me closer to that goal, and honestly, it would mean everything to me. So do me that quick favor right now and be part of this dream becoming reality. The show opened in this really fired up way, because instead of immediately jumping into the Kenneth Walker discussion, Stephen A. started by going absolutely ballistic about ESPN ranking the Rams third behind the Patriots. He was yelling about how disrespectful it is to put the Patriots ahead of the Rams when the Rams lost to Seattle by 4 points in a competitive NFC Championship game, while the Patriots got absolutely destroyed in the Super Bowl. Stephen A. was making this passionate argument about how anyone who watched that Super Bowl knows the Rams would have beaten the Patriots easily, and ranking them third is just insulting to everything the Rams accomplished this season. Shannon Sharpe immediately jumped in and started breaking down why the Rams were so close to winning it all and what they're missing. He was talking about how the Rams had one of the best offenses in football with Matthew Stafford winning MVP, how they have weapons like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, but how their special teams failures cost them everything. Shannon made this really compelling point about how the Rams lost to Seattle in the NFC Championship because Xavier Smith muffed 2 punts, and how special teams was the difference between the Rams playing in the Super Bowl and watching it from home. Mad Dog came in absolutely fired up, and he was yelling about how the Rams need to fix their special teams, but they also need to upgrade their running game if they want to beat teams like Seattle. He was talking about how Kyren Williams is a solid player, but he's just a 5th round pick who doesn't have that elite explosive element, and how the Rams need a true RB1 who can take over games. Mad Dog was really emphasizing how when you're that close to winning a Super Bowl, you need to make bold moves to get over the hump. Stephen A. brought the conversation specifically to Kenneth Walker III, and this is where things got really interesting. He started explaining Walker's situation and why trading for him would be the ultimate revenge move against Seattle. Stephen A. was talking about how Walker just won Super Bowl MVP with 135 rushing yards against the Patriots, how he dominated the Rams in their 2 matchups, and how stealing him from Seattle would completely shift the balance of power in the NFC West. He was really emphasizing how poetic it would be for the Rams to take Seattle's Super Bowl MVP and use him to finally beat them. Shannon jumped back in and started talking about why Kenneth Walker would be such a perfect fit in Sean McVay's offense. He was explaining how McVay's system is built around the run game and using play action to set up explosive plays downfield, but how the Rams haven't had a truly dominant running back since Todd Gurley. Shannon made this point about how Walker brings that physicality and explosiveness that would make the Rams' offense nearly impossible to defend because you'd have to respect the run and the pass equally. Mad Dog interrupted and started talking about what it would actually cost to acquire Kenneth Walker from the Seahawks. He was explaining how trading within the division is always expensive, how the Seahawks would want a massive haul, but how the Rams have 2 first-round picks, including the 13th and 29th overall selections. Mad Dog was making this argument about how the Rams should offer one of those first-round picks plus additional compensation, because when you're this close, you can't be afraid to go all in. Stephen A. came back and started discussing how Walker would specifically help Matthew Stafford and the offense. He was explaining how Stafford is 37 years old and just won MVP, but how having a dominant running game would take so much pressure off him and extend his effectiveness. Stephen A. was arguing that the best way to help your aging quarterback is to give him a powerful run game, and Walker would do exactly that while also opening up the play-action game that Stafford excels at. Shannon got back in there and started talking about the special teams connection and how this ties into the Rams' biggest weakness. He was explaining how the Rams' special teams cost them the NFC Championship, but how adding Walker would help them control games and keep their special teams off the field more. Shannon was making this point about how when you have a dominant running game, you control the clock and limit possessions, which means fewer opportunities for special teams mistakes. Mad Dog jumped in and started talking about the NFC West rivalry and why this move would be so devastating to Seattle. He was yelling about how Seattle just won the Super Bowl and has owned the Rams lately with 2 wins in the regular season and the NFC Championship victory, but how stealing their Super Bowl MVP would send shockwaves through the division. Mad Dog was making this argument about how division games are about respect and intimidation, and taking Walker from Seattle would be the ultimate power move. Stephen A. then shifted the conversation to talk about the draft and how this would impact their plans for the 13th pick. He was explaining how a lot of people want the Rams to draft Isaiah Lemon, who could be their 3rd receiver and punt returner, but how maybe they should use that pick as part of a package to get Walker instead. Stephen A. was arguing that while Lemon would be nice, Walker is a proven game changer who just dominated on the biggest stage. Shannon came back and made an interesting point about the Rams' championship window and why they need to act with urgency. He was talking about how the Rams have been in win now mode for years, how they traded away draft picks to win a Super Bowl a few years ago, and how they should continue that aggressive approach. Shannon was explaining how when you have a 37-year-old MVP quarterback, you can't waste time developing rookies. You need to add proven talent immediately. Mad Dog started getting animated again, and he was talking about how the Rams' defense is already elite and adding Walker would complete the puzzle. He was explaining how the Rams have guys like Jared Verse on defense, how their pass rush is dangerous, but how they need to control games offensively to keep their defense fresh. Mad Dog was making this point about how championship teams are built on running the ball and playing defense, and Walker would give them both. Stephen A. brought up the financial aspect of potentially trading for and paying Kenneth Walker. He was explaining how Walker is going to want a massive contract extension, how the Rams would need to manage their cap carefully, but how when you're this close to winning a Super Bowl, you can't worry too much about money. Stephen A. was arguing that the Rams ownership has shown they're willing to spend to win, and Walker would be worth every penny. Shannon jumped back in and started talking about Sean McVay and how this move would impact his coaching. He was explaining how McVay is one of the best offensive minds in football, but how he's been criticized for his game management in the NFC Championship, and how having Walker would make his job easier. Shannon was making this argument about how when you have a dominant runner, you don't have to be as creative or risky with your play calling, you can just line up and impose your will. Mad Dog came back and started discussing the revenge factor and how motivated Walker might be to stick it to Seattle. He was explaining how if the Seahawks trade Walker, he's gonna have a chip on his shoulder and want to prove them wrong, and what better way to do that than by helping the Rams beat Seattle. Mad Dog was making this point about how motivated players are the most dangerous players, and Walker would be out for blood. Stephen A. then brought the conversation to Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, and how adding Walker would help the receivers. He was explaining how when you have a dominant run game, it opens up one-on-one matchups for your receivers because safeties have to cheat down and run support. Stephen A. was arguing that Puka and Kupp would both benefit enormously from having Walker in the backfield because defenses couldn't just focus on stopping the pass. Shannon got back in there and started talking about the red zone and how Walker would specifically help in scoring situations. He was explaining how the Rams sometimes struggled to punch the ball in when they got close to the goal line, and how Walker is one of the best short yardage backs in the league. Shannon was making this passionate argument about how in playoff football, red zone efficiency is everything, and Walker would make the Rams nearly automatic inside the 20. Mad Dog jumped in and started talking about the psychological impact this trade would have on the NFC West. He was explaining how the 49ers and Cardinals would be terrified if the Rams added Walker, and how it would shift the entire power dynamic of the division. Mad Dog was yelling about how the Rams would instantly become the favorites in the division if they pulled this off.